Good afternoon, everyone. Can anyone hear me there? Hello, can anyone hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Vulnerability and Capacity Assessment webinar, which is being hosted by the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center and the National Climate Change Office. And it is being sponsored by this webinar is being sponsored by the National Climate Change Office under the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, Forestry, the Environment, Sustainable Development, and Immigration, in collaboration with the Global Environmental Facility and the United Nations Development Program, and of course, the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. So on this, I welcome everyone to the webinar. My name is Anivar Peralta. I'm a research assistant here at the center. I will do my best to moderate this session. And before we start the presentations, if you look at the screen, we're sharing with you here the agenda for the webinar. So all of the presenters are present here, which is presenters from the National Climate Change Office and also from the center. So before we start, I will kindly ask the presenters to kindly introduce themselves before we start the presentation. So I already introduced myself. Now I pass it on to the others.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diana Ruiz, Science Officer at the Climate Change Center.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Albert Gilhari, and I'm a software developer at the 5Cs.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Michelle Lopez, and I'm Document Management Officer for the 5Cs.
I'm Vincent Peter. I'm from the 5Cs in the Project Development Management Unit.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Johanna Pacheco, and I'm the Climate Change Officer for Adaptation at the National Climate Change Office.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colin Mattis. I'm the Deputy Chief Climate Change Officer in the National Climate Change Office.
So there you go. These are the presenters of the various topics. So let's move on to before we move on to the first presentation, I would kindly request that questions be given at the end of each presentation. We have some allotted time for that. However, if we are unable to cover all of the questions for a particular presentation, we can also use the time at the end of all the presentations where we can have a discussion and also answer some of the questions that remain be answered. So I would really appreciate your attention on this. Having said that, we move on to the first presentation, which is the overview on climate variability and change, which focuses on the general concepts. Just give me a second here. I'll try to switch the screen from this agenda to the presentation. Let's see. Okay, we managed to put the presentation on. My apologies for the small delay. So let's move on with the presentation. So this presentation will be presented by myself and by Ms. Diana Riz from the center. And the contents of this presentation are seven topics. I will be covering the first three topics, which is weather and climate, climate change, climate variability, and Diana will be covering the remaining four topics, which is hazards, vulnerability, exposure, and risk. So the first concept, the first definition we want to talk about is weather. So what is weather? Weather is the state of the atmosphere on a daily basis for a particular area with respect to temperature, precipitation, humidity, wind, cloudiness, and pressure. and of course, other atmospheric parameters. So a good example of a weather condition would be temperature. And this morning, for example, for Belmopan City, the temperature at Belmopan City at 9 a.m. was 80.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And the cloudy conditions, it was partly cloudy. So that's an example of the weather. Now we move on to climate. So what is climate? We hear this term almost on a daily basis. So climate is basically the existing or current weather conditions of a region, which is experienced throughout the year and is averaged over a series of years. So this is more long-term, and the particular area is more bigger, which in this case is described as a region. And for example, for Belize, according to the Belize Meteorological Service, when it comes to climatic conditions for temperature, the Met Service says that the mean temperature for Belize varies from 81 degrees Fahrenheit along the coast to 69 degrees Fahrenheit in the hills. And then they go and the further state that the coldest month is January, while the highest temperatures are experienced during the month of May. So basically, this is an example of the climate for Belize. And from what we are reading here, you know, May is going to be one of the hottest hottest month of the year. So, and we're in May right now. So that means, you know, we better prepare ourselves for this heat, no? Having said that, we move on to the next slide. So in summary, when we compare weather and climate, weather is, like I mentioned, is more short-term on a daily basis, which varies from day to day, while climate is more long-term. And when I say long-term, it's 25, 30 years or even more. And variations occur over seasons and years for a particular region. So we move on to the topic of climate change. So what is climate change? Climate change is any change over time due to natural variability or as a result of human activity. Climate change, of course, is a long-term continuous change, it's not a short-term. And because of, and actually we have been experiencing climate change over the past years. As we are aware, the global surface temperatures have been increasing, which has led to global warming, to sea level rise. And with human activity, we have been releasing excess amounts of greenhouse gases. And with the heating, with the heat given off by climate change, we are now facing ocean acidification. So therefore, climate change is something current and is really affecting our society, our environment here in this globe. Another term that we want to cover is climate variability. So climate variability is the yearly fluctuation of climate, which is either above or below a long-term average. And this fluctuation is considered to be short to medium term. And it is because of these climate fluctuations that we are now experiencing droughts, floods, and temperature changes and other extreme weather events in our society and in our environment. Here we have a diagram in this slide. We have a diagram showing the general impacts of climate change in our environment. If we look at the terrestrial environment, we see how climate change is changing rainfall patterns, which is also causing stronger storms, more heat, more higher temperatures and more heat waves, more droughts and wildfires. When we move to the marine environment, we see how the oceans are becoming warmer, the sea level is rising, and these two factors are contributing to the death and the damage of coral reefs. So therefore, in a nutshell, these are some of the general impacts of climate change. So climate change does not discriminate. It impacts everyone and everywhere. Here in this slide, we see the various sectors in our society, in our environment. And what we can see from this diagram is that water is the central sector amongst all of the sectors, and everyone is interconnected, which means that everyone is depending on the other in order to provide the goods and services to the people and to whoever needs it. However, with climate change, the impact on one sector will actually affect all of the sectors. So therefore, everything in our sector, all of the sectors are basically at risk and vulnerable of climate change. This diagram here, as you can see, shows the visible impacts of climate change on the tourism industry because it affects the experience of tourists. In this case, in this example, we can say that a married couple went to the Placencia beach in Belize, and they're in the beach and they're trying to have a nice touristic time, a nice touristic vacation. However, it's April and it starts to rain and they're in the beach. Now, who gets mad? It's the wife that gets mad. Now, she's all annoyed and angry with the husband, wanting to know why did he plan such a vacation when it's raining? She wanted the sun. However, the husband says, and I'll read from the text in the diagram, he says, "What do you mean this was not a good idea? How would I know it would rain here in April?" So that's his response to her, but the end of the story, we do not know. I am not sure what happened to the husband. But what we can see here is that climate change and climate variability is already changing weather patterns and precipitation patterns as well. And also it's making precipitation patterns become unpredictable, especially when planning a vacation and carrying out activities in the environment. So it is affecting everyone. So this is the last slide. So now I invite Diana Ruiz to continue with the presentation to cover other concepts.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diana, and I'll be walking you through the definition of hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and risk. And here we will change the gears up just a little bit and we'll make the presentation more interactive. So I'll be asking you some questions related to the schematic or the diagrams on the slide. And this applies to the staff in this room as well. So here we have a diagram of a river valley. So I am hovering my cursor over what is the river. And as you can see, we have various structures across various slopes. So I'd like to also give credit to GIZ because this is a concept that was developed by them. So what is a hazard? In short, it is a situation that poses a level of threat to life, health, property, or environment, and it is dormant or potential. It can be geophysical, which looks at earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes, hydrometeorological, which looks at storms, landslides, flooding, or climatological, which looks at the extremes, for example, heat waves and cold spells, or societal or technological, which looks at emissions or pollution. So in this case, in our river valley, our hazard is increase in extreme precipitation, which is leading to flooding. So for example, we have rising water levels. And my question is, but before I get into that, I'll just read to you the definition of exposure, and this is according to the IPCC, who is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Exposure is the presence of people, livelihoods, species or ecosystems, environmental functions, services and resources, infrastructure or economic, social or cultural assets in place and settings that could be adversely affected. So it is a function of geography. So it's based on your location. So in this case, we're looking at exposure. So from the diagram, when we have rising water levels, what is the difference between the houses' locations? Okay, so to get your responses, my colleagues will assist and he will read from the chat responses that you will be giving. So he'll read it out to us. So what is the difference between the house's location? So we have elevation, proximity, houses closer to waterways, the distance to and from water, okay, so we have some excellent responses. Thank you very much. So indeed, it is, you're looking at the water levels and their proximity to that flooding area. So we move on at this point. Now I have a separate or an addition to that schematic, and it shows family A. So I'm hovering my cursor over family A and then family B. And so the question is now, what is the difference between family A and family B? Just off the schematic here. What differences can you see? So family A and family B. Say it again. The distance to and from water. Size of the family and means of transportation. So one has car versus bicycle. The other one has 4 children plus the 2 adults. And then we have just a couple, right? And then we have the wooden structure versus the concrete structure. Resources available, yes. So as we can see, in the event that we have flooding, because of these resources, they would more than likely respond differently. So you have the bigger family who would have to think about the kids and how to get out. A bicycle could not take that family load and move out of that area in the cases where it's urgent to relocate. The couple, it would be apparent that they have more resources. So if they have some damages, it's likely that they would be able to recover quicker. They have their car and it's just them, so they'll be able to just pack themselves up and leave the area and move to higher grounds. So that brings us to the concept of vulnerability, which is the propensity or predisposition to be adversely affected. So that brings us to risk, which is the combination of hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. And I'm not sure if you can see it on the screen, but I had it highlighted. So the first word, the HA out of hazard, vulnerability B, and exposure E, which gives us the acronym HAVE, is basically what leads to risk. And so why is our risk increasing? Well, we are more exposed. We have our businesses, our communities in hazardous locations, or people or assets. We have poor land use management. Vulnerability is increasing. Are we adhering to building codes? Do you build on stilts if we're in flood-prone areas? Looking at coping capacity, do we have any funds in the event that we have a disaster or an event or an activity? Do we have insurance schemes? Natural hazards are also increasing. So increases in cyclones, we have droughts, we have increased precipitation, which would lead to flooding, etc. So these conditions are increasing. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and thank you for your responses as well. And in the annex, we have the various definitions according to the IPCC. So you'll have that for reference whenever you need them. So with that, again, I'd like to thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Diana. So let me go and check to see on the comment box to see if anyone has provided any questions. We might have, let me see if we have some time remaining. We might have we have a few more minutes, about 14 minutes or any questions. So let me check the chat and see if anyone has any questions that we can help and respond to. Okay, let's see. So anyone has any questions concerning this presentation, feel free to comment on the webinar chat, and we will do our best to answer your question. And also, if you wish to speak, please use the raise hand option, so you can also speak. Sure. Sure. We at the end of the presentation, at the end of this webinar, we'll compile our presentations and then we will share it with all the participants. That is no problem. We will do that. This is from Mr. Rancharan. If no one has any other question, we will now move on to the next presentation, which is Ms. Joanna Pacheco. So now I will invite her to come for her presentation. I will just bear with me. I will try to load her presentation on the screen. Okay, we have here Joanna's presentation. Now we invite her to come and give her presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. So today I'll be presenting on the emerging climate variability and change issues in Belize. And for this presentation, I will focus on key sectors. So it will be divided by sectors. So let's get into it. So the content of the presentation, I'll give a brief introduction, then get into the emerging issues by sector, which will be agriculture, fisheries, tourism, coastal zone, and water, and then a short conclusion. So as we all know, throughout Belize and the Caribbean, the consequences of climate change are already impacting communities and different sectors. And given current climate projections for the region and Belize, impacts will be exacerbated and have highly noticeable effects on our society and sustainable development of the nation. So we will experience a lot of different changes, such as changes in intensity, distribution, and frequency of extreme weather events. We may have stronger and more frequent storms and hurricanes, rising sea levels, increased sea surface temperature, ocean acidification, coral bleaching, droughts, wildfires, changes in crop production, and of course, many other impacts due to climate change. And Belize may face all of these in the near future. So these changes will have direct and indirect impacts on our productive sectors and the environment. So this will in turn affect Belize's sustainable and economic development. So as I said before, key development sectors is the focus for this presentation, as These are identified as the most vulnerable to the impacts due to their high reliance on natural resources and the direct link that they have on our social well-being. So of course, these aren't the only sectors that will be affected by climate change, but because of their high vulnerability, it is the focus for the presentation. So given Belize's geographic location on our low-lying coastal areas, this leaves us highly susceptible to the impacts of climate change. And as a country, we are economically dependent on natural resources and the services they provide. So as we all know, a lot of Belizeans depend on fishing, tourism, forestry. So this magnifies our vulnerability, and due to rising temperatures and the impacts it will have on agriculture productivity, fisheries, and the production of other sectors, we will be severely affected. So over the past few years, Belize has already experienced many effects due to climate change. And we've seen droughts, we've seen flooding, we have changes in precipitation and temperature. And the country is also seasonally affected by hurricanes and tropical storms. And as we all know, that most scientists agree that these will become more intense each year due to the effects of anthropogenic global warming. So in order to effectively address all these issues that I have mentioned, Belize and the rest of the world, of course, needs to take multilateral action. And this needs to be done by policymakers, technical experts, the private sector, and the public, so that we can seek solutions to make changes to reduce global emissions. So of course, even though we might take mitigation actions to reduce global emissions, the effects that are already taking place and that will take place in the near future require urgent action now. So we need to adapt to the imminent changes in order to reduce vulnerability and enhance resilience to future climate risks. So as I stated before, in this presentation, we will look at various climate change issues and the impacts that they will have. So this will be by sectors. And the key sectors are agriculture, fisheries, tourism, coastal zone, and water. So all of these impacts will affect our social and economic growth. So let's get into agriculture. So as we all know, the agriculture sector is highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change because it is highly dependent on natural resources. So we need, good quality air, water, soil, and crops need a favorable, range of conditions or tolerable conditions in order to grow. So several studies have actually shown that agricultural vulnerability is higher in developing countries. And this is because these countries are already at or near their temperature threshold for some crops. And agriculture is actually a larger component of national GDP than in developed countries. So for example, in Belize, we know that many people rely on agriculture and it's one of our biggest economic sectors. So we will be drastically affected by climate change, and we also have limited adaptive capacity as a developing nation. So agriculture has been an important industry throughout Belize's history, and we know that we have main export crops that we rely on, such as sugarcane, banana, citrus, but we also have other crops that small farmers rely on for subsistence and their livelihoods. So these are crops such as rice, corn, red kidney beans, and vegetables. And actually most of our farmers, about 75% of them, have small farms which are less than 10 acres. So they will be affected as well as the large scale farmers. And so both large scale farmers and small scale farmers are at high risk. And agriculture will be drastically affected by changes in precipitation, temperature, drought, carbon dioxide concentration, and these will all impact crop productivity and yields. So the impact on yields will affect all of us because it could result in higher prices and food insecurity. And yields may be affected by increase in air temperature, accompanied by higher evaporation rates, variable rainfall, increases and decreases in rainfall, and drought depending on the location in Belize. So some areas may have more rain and some may have less. So these impacts will all affect agriculture. Agriculture will also be affected by sea level rise, which may cause flooding of agricultural lands near the coast, and it could lead to saltwater intrusion and salinization of groundwater and soil, which will also affect crop productivity and yield. And then we will also have higher temperatures, which could result in soil aridity and lead to increase and spread of pests and diseases, and place pressure on water resources for water irrigation purposes. So for people that rely on rain-fed agricultural systems, they will require improved management techniques due to the changes in precipitation patterns, and this could also lead to higher production costs because farmers will have to spend more. And flooding and wind damage can also be expected during hurricane and storm season, and this could also lead to decreased production and yields. So all of these impacts will affect our productivity and yields, and it could lead to higher crop prices and decreased food security. So farmers aren't the only ones that are going to be affected. All Belizeans would be affected by changes caused in the agriculture sector. So now we can look at the fisheries sector. The fisheries sector is also very dependent on natural resources as well, of course. So because of its high reliance on natural resources, it will be impacted by increased sea surface temperature, ocean acidification, sea level rise, and extreme weather events. So fishes require healthy habitats in order to survive and reproduce. These include areas such as coral reef systems, wetlands, mangroves, seagrass beds. And these are areas where fish usually spawn, breed, feed, or grow to maturity. So the rising sea levels could lead to partial or complete disappearance of these habitats through inundation. And rising near surface water temperature could also increase acidification and could lead to coral bleaching and dieback of corals. And again, many people depend on healthy reefs, so they provide habitats and nutrients for a lot of fish species, and fishermen use these areas to fish. So a decline in healthy corals will affect the livelihoods of many Belizeans. And all of these impacts will lead to decreased fish production, making it more difficult for fishermen to capture the same amount of fish that they are that they're accustomed to catching, and will affect their livelihoods, as I said, and would also affect costs of fish. And apart from fishing, the agriculture production systems will also be affected. So this will mostly be a function of their geography and changes in water quality parameters. So drivers affecting agriculture production could be loss of land and mangroves because of sea level rise, loss of sheltered locations, and impacts from hurricanes and extreme weather events. And we also look at the tourism sector, which again depends on our natural resources. So they will be affected by climate change and sea level rise. And increases in air temperature are expected to be from 2 to 4 degrees Celsius at the end of the century. And it could actually make conditions unbearable for tourists, especially the elderly or retired tourist population, which actually accounts for a high percentage of visitors to Belize. So the projected variability in precipitation will very likely lead to extreme conditions, could increase drought during the dry season, cause torrential rains and flooding in the rainy season, and water and food shortages or higher prices for local and imported food. So these would all affect tourist arrivals to Belize because if it's too dry or too rainy, they may not want to come. And also tropical storms and hurricanes compounded by sea level rise are expected to increase in intensity. So this could cause flooding and erosion of coastlines, and flooding will cause damage to transport and infrastructure. So these damages would all lead to decrease in tourist arrivals, which would then affect people who depend on the tourism sector. Also, there will be coastal areas in Belize that experience higher levels of saltwater intrusion and rising water tables, and this could also decrease water quality. So all of these impacts compounded together would then lead to less tourists arriving in Belize, less revenue, and therefore impacting all those people that rely on the tourism sector. We'll now look at coastal zone. So the coastal zone is one of the most populated areas in Belize, and it is where a bulk of the economic activity takes place. So all the previous sectors that I mentioned rely on the coastal zone: tourism, fisheries, agriculture. And as we all know, most of our coastal zone is actually below the high tide level. So this places it in a very risky position in regards to climate-driven sea level rise. And this will be augmented by storm surges. So many Belizeans that live along the coast depend on the coastal resources, and impact to the coastal zone and the other sectors such as fishing and tourism would highly affect their livelihoods and hinder their economic and social development. And as we all know, all sectors are linked, so many cross-sectorial issues exist. And this includes increased coastal erosion, extensive inundation from sea level rise, storm surges, which may lead to flooding. And these would all lead to saltwater intrusion into estuaries and groundwaters. So these biophysical impacts may cause loss of coastal habitats, property damage, flooding and loss of life, as well as have economic consequences for rural production and urban lifestyles. And it may lead to displacement of communities. Now, emerging issues in the water sector. So the water sector will mainly be affected by changes in precipitation patterns. So we may have less rain during the dry season and more rain during the rainy season. So climate projections have shown that rainfall will decrease slightly and become more variable. So we will have changes in the amount of rain that we receive throughout the year. And variability in rainfall will result in the risk of flooding from excessive rainfall in low-lying coastlands and decreases in water supply. So less rainfall and increased temperature can also lead to increased evapotranspiration and loss of available fresh water. And decrease in precipitation will reduce groundwater and aquifer recharge and increase saltwater intrusion and contamination of freshwater resources. So sea level rise and storm surges will also affect the water sector through saline intrusions in coastal aquifers and soils. So it's not only freshwater that will be affected, our coastal aquifers and soils will also be affected. And it can also lead to flooding of coastal lowlands and communities where many Belizeans live and base their livelihoods. Excuse me. So other related sectors which depend on the coastal zone will also be highly affected by changes in water supply. So as I stated before, many of the other sectors depend on the coastal zone. So agriculture will be affected. Sorry, not on the coastal zone, on water. So agriculture will be affected. If we don't have enough water, there will be decrease in crop production, which could lead to food insecurity. Tourism will be affected by water insecurity. The health sector could be affected by loss of life, spread of diseases, and food and water insecurity. So all sectors are linked to each other. So now in conclusion, we can say that these impacts and issues that arise from climate change are not only limited to these sectors. For example, the forestry sector will experience changes as well, because they are also highly dependent on our natural resources. So the forestry sector could experience changes in growth patterns, insect and pest defense, and productivity. However, these sectors were looked at specifically because of their economic importance, and this provides a good baseline for the other sectors. So it's a good representation. And it is evident from the issues mentioned that adaptation to climate change requires a multilateral approach that needs to be developed, because these sectors are not affected in isolation. Therefore, vulnerabilities will not happen in isolation. So in order to decrease our vulnerabilities as a nation and increase climate resilience, then adaptation measures must address and link issues across all sectors. So that's it. Okay. So is there any documented evidence of sea level rise in Belize? Same for increase in sea surface temperatures. This is by Mr. Rancharan. As well as how far are we in quantifying the effects of climate change in the various sectors? I don't know if I can answer this.
There is a document on a regional level that deals specifically to sea level rise, speaks about the quantification and impacts, and there are specific impacts on various countries across the Caribbean, and Belize is one of them. That document is available online. It was produced, I think it was on the CaribSafe. It's called a quantification, something. It's a very long title, but it deals specifically sea level rise. The executive summary as well as the full report and the key policy notes is available via our clearinghouse. So I can, during the clearinghouse presentation, I can show them that document.
Okay. And Mr. Rancharan has another question. What challenges can we expect in addressing cross-sectoral cooperation? Oh, okay, so challenges we can expect in trying to get cross-sectoral cooperation. Well, we see these challenges every day, I suppose, especially, you know, trying to work with other ministries or other sectors. It's very difficult to get everyone together in the same place and to come up with ideas. And there's also lack of resources. As we all know, you know, we're a small country, so sometimes we lack financial resources or even technical expertise. So that's another issue. And maybe, well, not maybe, there are many issues that we face that we can't address because of the lack of political will. And we also, because of lack of resources, we have lack of adaptive capacity. So these are all issues that we could face in trying to get cooperation. That's it. Okay. So.
Thank you, Joanna, for that presentation. Now, our next presenter is Dr. Ulrich Trutz. However, it's very unfortunate. He just told us that he will be unable to provide his presentation or deliver his presentation due to urgent matters. So he sends his apologies for not being able to to present. So given that, we move on to the next presentation, which will be delivered by Mr. Colin Matos. So Mattis, my apologies. So I invite Mr. Mattis to come and deliver his presentation. And just bear us a few seconds as we try to load his presentation onto the screen.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colin Mattis, and this afternoon I want to bring to you the presentation entitled Ensuring Effective Adaptation at a National Level, the Role of Vulnerability and Capacity Assessments. In this presentation, what I want to do, I want to give you an indication of how important VCAs are, that's the Vulnerability and Capacity Assessments. And I want to give you at least 3 examples on how VCs can improve adaptation within Belize. I didn't go in depth into a lot of issues because they were supposed to be covered by the presentation that was supposed to come before mine. But I hope that I can cover the issue of VCs and how they can contribute to Belize in a holistic manner so that we all can have an understanding. Now, we heard about climate change. You know what climate change is. You know about vulnerability. Now, if we are to adapt to climate change, we need to have an understanding of vulnerability. And we need to have a good understanding. Climate change, as you heard, impacts different people in different ways, impacts different sectors in different ways, based on the capacity that they have to respond. And what this means is that many of the factors that shape vulnerability have nothing to do with climate. Of course, there are factors such as where you live. If you live in a floodplain, if you live near to the coast where sea level rise may occur, that has something to do with how vulnerable you are. But there are other factors that affect vulnerability, such as power and social status, economic status, access to information and services, and control over resources. Those that have a higher economic status are more able to adapt. Those that have access to more information are more able to adapt. The same with those who have the most resources. Let's say those who have the most money, they're better able to adapt. You saw this slide with a family with just 2 persons in the family, and they had a car, while the other family had a bicycle. Now, you could say that the ones with a car, they have a higher capacity to adapt because they can evacuate faster. So there are other than climatic factors and environmental factors, there are many other factors that affect how vulnerable you are to climate change. Now I want to go into the importance of vulnerability and capacity assessments. Now, vulnerability and capacity assessments are important because they're a vehicle for informing the need for adaptation and capacity improvements, and they aim to ensure that adaptation investments are effective. So what is this telling us? VCAs are there to tell us what we need to adapt to. They give us an indication of who's in the area, who is vulnerable, the impacts they are vulnerable to, and what they need to adapt to. They determine the degree to which different groups are vulnerable, and they determine the extent to which the groups can cope with different climate change impacts. VCAs aid in the selection and the evaluation of different adaptation options. So it enables you to choose which options are better so that people can adapt to the impacts of climate change. As such, VCAs ensure that adaptation measures achieve the desired outcomes. Just imagine if you're going to implement an action to help people to adapt to climate change. You need information to ensure that the measure that you're going to implement is effective. You need information. So what we're saying is that vulnerability and capacity assessments are actions that are carried out to give you that information. And that's one of the main purpose of these assessments. So they give you that information, and as such, you can act on that information, and you can implement or put certain practices or activities into action that can help people to be able to cope with the impacts of climate change. How can VCAs contribute to effective adaptation at the national level? I mentioned some of this before, but let me go a little in depth. Let's say for Belize, how can it contribute to effective adaptation? First thing, we won't be acting blindly. I come from the National Climate Change Office, and our main purpose is to develop and implement policies for climate change for Belize. As an office, we can't act blindly. We have to have information. And so the VCAs, and we have done about 3 in the past. The last one was completed in 2015. And what they do is, number one, they provide education and build shared understanding. That means that it gives information. What kind of information does it give? The vulnerability and capacity assessment gives information about environmental, social, and environmental characteristics of the area. It gives information, it defines the area. What are the environmental characteristics? What can we say about the environment, about the lakes and the rivers or whatever is there? What about the social status of the people? What about their social constructs within the area? It could be a country, it could be a district, it could be a community. What are the economic characteristics? What are the sectors? Do they mine for gold? Or is tourism one of the predominant sectors within the country or within the district? What about the population dynamics within the area? What are the characteristics of climate? What are the seasons? Rainy seasons, dry seasons? What are the characteristics of past, present, and future climate? And that's why climate modeling is done as part of the VCA assessment. And lastly, what are the impacts of climate change? So this is one way that VCAs can contribute to effective adaptation, because it gives us this information. The second thing is that it helps us, after we get this information, it helps us to set our priorities straight. What am I saying? We don't want to implement adaptation measures that benefit the rich and powerful. We want to implement adaptation measures that benefit those that need it most. And so we want to identify, it helps us to identify the regions or the locations or the communities where the most vulnerable people are. It helps us to identify the populations, the sectors, and the activities that we should target. And it helps us to identify if there's need for further assessment or evaluation within an area. So when we get this information, we can prioritize. We can say, you know what, maybe Roaring Creek needs more attention than Belmopan, because the people in Belmopan are doing very well, they have good infrastructure and so forth. And so we carry most of our resources to Roaring Creek. So that's just an example. The third way that it helps us is it helps us to evaluate decision alternatives. What am I saying? It helps us to assess costs and benefits of different adaptation actions. I might come with a bright idea that might cost $1 million, something that's not possible for us to implement in this financial climate. And so using certain tools, we can choose those alternative adaptation options that are more cost effective and that are more beneficial than others. Lastly, it helps us in implementation. When we get all of this information and we can make proper choices, VCAs lead to the implementation, because this is the last stage. When we get this information, we have to implement the choices that we have made, the best adaptation options for the area, for the community, for the district, or for the country. And so these are just 4 important ways how vulnerability and capacity assessment contribute to the to adaptation at a national level. Now, I give you information on how they contribute. What I want to do right now, I want to give 3 concrete examples of how the VCA process can help with adaptation in Belize. Just 3 examples, of course there are more, but I just want to focus on these 3 for this afternoon. Now, adaptation advocacy. When we advocate for something, we want our voice to be heard. We want to get across a point. And in terms of climate change, it has to be an important point. Lives are at risk, or livelihoods are at risk. And so doing a vulnerability and capacity assessment gives us the information to use if we're going to advocate for certain things, let's say from the government. Now, it says building adaptation capacity requires that we challenge existing policies and power structures within our country. Maybe there is some sort of a policy that is not helping us to adapt to climate change. And so the VCA process can give us information to challenge that policy, to tell our leaders, you know what, this is not right. You need to improve this, or you need to change this. It can provide us with a platform for designing campaigns. As such, we're talking about the information that we get from the VCAs, but help us to design these campaigns so that we can effectively advocate for certain things. They can be locally based, they can be nationally based, and they can facilitate acquisition of rights for certain people. Example as it relates to livelihood resources. And so these are just some points on the advocacy. They can be targeted at national level policies, which are not supportive for adaptation, and I mentioned this before, or do not recognize specific needs or priorities of vulnerable people within a particular area. And so the vulnerability and capacity assessment can help not only people in government, but people outside of government. It gives them the information to let them realize that, you know what, this climate change issue is very important. And there are certain shortfalls that are in policy that we need to address. And the government isn't addressing it. So let's come together. Let's put together a campaign, and let's get our allies, let's get our targets, and let's go forward to help to change things within our country. It could be policies, it could be activities, it could be decisions made even at Parliament. But the VCA process helps for us to advocate for better adaptation within the country. Now, the second way that I want to speak to you about that a VCA process can help in facilitating effective adaptation within Belize is it helps to integrate adaptation into development projects. Now, there may be many activities that are being carried out within our country. Let's say building roads, building bridges, and so forth. There may be a case in which many of these activities are not considering climate change issues. And so the VCA process provides that information needed for the mainstreaming of climate change into these development projects. Now, when we mainstream climate change into these projects, it helps to increase the sustainability and the impact of these projects on sectors such as water, agriculture, livelihoods, and health, because these are important sectors. So the VCA process helps to enhance the beneficial impacts of these projects. Now, climate change impacts can seriously affect development results. And in certain cases, climate change can cause a great setback to gains that have been made. Let's say a bridge has been built 5 years ago, not considering that it has been built in a major flood area. Maybe it was built too low, not considering climate change impacts. And so when we get this information, and when we put it, or when we mainstream it into our project or our plan or our strategy or whatever it is, we can, let's say, preempt these impacts and put better plans in place so that this bridge that we have just built won't last for 5 years and be washed away by a major flood, but it will last for 50 years, or it will last for 100 years. And so that's what mainstreaming helps us to do. And that's why the vulnerability and capacity assessment is very important. And so what I'm trying to say is that if there's a project, let's say, that has a goal related to poverty reduction, livelihood security, or improved well-being, then the sustainability of the project or the impact of the project can be increased by integrating or mainstreaming climate change into, let's say, the project document. So that's part of my second point. Let me just give you two other points relating to this one. When we mainstream climate change into our projects or strategies or our actions, we want to achieve two things. We want to climate proof it. And I alluded to this before, because climate proofing something helps us to increase the sustainability of whatever we're doing. It's going to be building a bridge, building a road. It helps us to climate proof it so that it can last for, let's say, 100, 200 years, rather than building a road that breaks up within a year or something like that. So that's one of the first objectives of mainstreaming or integrating adaptation into these projects. Number two, it reduces the vulnerability of the target populations through interventions which can improve their adaptive capacity. And adaptive capacity, you may have heard of it before, but it deals with your ability to put things in place to cope with climate change impacts. And so when we mainstream climate change into our projects or actions, it helps to build adaptive capacity of the people in the area or the people that we're targeting. And so let me move on to the third way that I want to mention, that I want to tell you about, of how the VCAs can help in effective adaptation at a national level. VCAs help us to implement targeted adaptation programs, targeted programs. When we do our VCA and we get all this wonderful information, we can put things in place at a national level and at a local or community level. Let me start with the national level. Now, at a national level, the information that you acquire at the VCA through the vulnerability and capacity assessment can help you to develop and to implement national projects that can target multiple sectors, agriculture, tourism, health, coastal zone, and so forth. And these projects can also target multiple issues, such as education and awareness, poverty, access to resources, human rights, resilient livelihoods. An example is the EU Global Climate Change Alliance project that was implemented a few years ago. That's an example of a project that targeted many sectors rather than just one sector, rather than just energy, rather than just agriculture. It targeted about 3 or 4 sectors in that one project. And so the vulnerability and capacity assessment can help us to develop and implement those projects in an effective manner. Now, these projects, when we develop them, they can facilitate changes at the national level. They can help us to, coming out of these projects, can be new policies, can be improvements in infrastructure, can be the development of new technologies, capacity building for groups and civil society and governments and so forth. So these are some of the things that can come out of these projects. What about at the local government or the community level? Now, the vulnerability and capacity assessment process can act as a catalyst for dialogue in communities on issues related to vulnerability. That means everyone can get involved, not just a top-down process where the 5Cs or the National Climate Change Office come to say, you know what, we're here to do this activity, and these are your impacts, and these are your vulnerabilities. The vulnerability and capacity assessment process help people to be able to talk to us and to tell us about their experience and help us to reach the conclusions of how best we can address the climate change impacts that will occur in their area. And this can lead to the development or the identification of new approaches to livelihood strategies, new alliances within the communities, the formation of groups, and so forth to solve common problems, especially those related to climate change. I have an example of a specific activity or project that can come out of the VCA process at the local government or the community level. So this is my example. Now, the process, the vulnerability and capacity assessment process can identify impacts of climate change let's say in the districts, impacts such as floods, droughts, erratic rainfall, and so forth. And using that information, you can develop a project that can aim to facilitate the development of district or community action plans to address these issues. And the development, the process of the development of these plans can help to identify priority actions to reduce vulnerability to climate change. Now, the expected outcome of that project will be, as I said, the action plans that will incorporate climate change adaptation priorities that were specifically told to us or given to us with the involvement of the members of the community, those that are more vulnerable. And they can help to increase the capacity of these people to adapt to climate change. Now, this can promote district level action to reduce vulnerability while addressing some of the systemic inequalities that increase vulnerability of vulnerable people, such as women, young children, and the sick. So this is just my articulation of an example of a project that can come out of the vulnerability and capacity assessment that can be implemented at a local or community level. Now, I want to let you know that today's poverty is yesterday's unaddressed vulnerability. Many of the things that happens in terms of disasters, in terms of how much we're vulnerable to climate change, is as a result of our actions a lot of the times. Bad and terrible planning and so forth. Not mainstreaming climate change into what we're doing. And when you don't mainstream climate change into your actions, you're acting blindly. And so a couple of years down the road when certain things happen and you're vulnerable, we should always remember that this is something that could have been addressed a few years before. If we had the information through a VCA assessment, and if we had put things in place to reduce how much maybe people or structures or communities or districts are affected by climate change. Now, climate change impacts can undermine development in communities, in sectors, in households, and so forth. And many development activities, even within our country, have not taken proper account of the need to protect people and their livelihoods from climate change impacts. And as I said before, this can erase all of the hard-earned projects that we have made by introducing or implementing actions in the past. And as such, it is important for us to take VCAs into consideration, for us to put more resources into ensuring that the VCAs, that we have them, firstly, and that they are broad enough to identify where the most vulnerable people are to climate change, which areas are more vulnerable, and where the vulnerable people are, so that we can put things in place to ensure that our actions are sustainable in the long run. And as a country, as ministries, as organizations, it's important when we are planning, it's important for us to consider climate change even in the early stages of any project or program. And the reason why I'm saying this, not just because I'm from the National Climate Change Office, but I'm saying this because this is important in the long run for saving lives. It's important for safeguarding livelihoods. Everyone wants a good life, not just for today or next year, but for their children and their grandchildren. So it helps us achieve that sustainability that we're looking for in anything that we're doing. And so it's important for us to ensure that the impacts of climate change that we have acquired through VCAs are integrated into whatever we may be doing in our own sectors or wherever we are. And so this is my presentation, and I hope that I articulated very clearly what the VCA is and how it can help us to adapt effectively at the national level. I'll now turn you over to the moderator
Well, basically, let's see if we have any questions for this presentation. So we have two questions here.
Okay. I'm seeing two questions. Now, the first question says, I think a major challenge in addressing cross-sectoral cooperation, well, this is a comment, I believe, a comment in relation to what was asked before. So, I mean, I'll still read it since I already started. I think a major challenge in addressing cross-sectoral cooperation is that each sector is so focused on their own sector and its priorities that they tend to fail to look at the larger picture, ignoring the true impact that other sectors can have on their specific sector. Each sector is wearing a blinder, preventing them from seeing the links between sectors. And of course, that comes back to the turf issue that we experience within and outside of government on a regular basis. And so one of the things that we try to always say is that there needs to be more cooperation within and outside of government. This is one country, and whatever we're doing should benefit all of us. And I believe that when we join hands together and when we cooperate with each other, it helps us not to waste resources, and it helps our actions to be more effective. And so I hope that, well, I hope that all of us here, maybe in the future will be ministers, or, you know, maybe we'll be CEOs or something. Somebody says not me. But maybe in the future, I hope that we can ensure that these changes occur and that there can be more collaboration between sectors and ministries and departments and so forth. Then the next question is, what issues need to be taken into account when planning a vulnerability and capacity assessment in urban areas? Now, I think that the issues to be taken into account in urban areas are the same in other areas. Because when you're doing an assessment, first thing you have to have the resources to carry it out. It is not a cheap venture, and it is very, I don't want to say very expensive, but it is expensive. And you have to have the resources. And it is much better if we have local practitioners within the country that can carry out these assessments. And as such, that's why we're doing this training, so that we can give you the capacity needed so that you can help to carry out assessments whenever they're carried out within our country, so that we don't have to pay so many thousands of dollars to people from far, far away to do the work that we could do in our own country. And especially in any area, including urban areas. I mentioned some of the factors that you have to consider. You have to consider the environment. Maybe you have to think, you know what you have to get the characteristics of the environment, and you have to have an idea of what in this environment, what climate activities in this environment can impact this city or this urban area. Let's say Belize City, it's an urban area. One of the issues in Belize City is that it is low-lying. The seawalls are no good. And well, there are many other issues that I won't want to mention in relation to how the streets are built and so forth. The drainage is terrible. And as such, these are things that you would have to consider, and you would have to have an idea of how it would affect people, or how what are impacts to the people living in the area. One of the important things that you need to think about also is the future impacts, because they have been flooding in Belize City for a while. But what are the future impacts of climate change? So this area will increase in rainfall, lead to the increasing of the vulnerability of the people. Will it lead to increased flooding within the area? And those are some of the things you will need to consider. But I just want to let you know that the VCA study will give you an indication of what is in the area. It will give you an indication of the environment, the climate, what are the sectors that are active within the area, what are the sectors or people or activities that can be affected by climate change, and it will give you an indication of their capacity to adapt. Let's say the south side of Belize and the north side. People like to say south and north. Of course, certain areas of Belize City will be less able to adapt to climate change, maybe because of improper drainage, maybe because of lack of jobs, maybe because of maybe little opportunities for education. And all this lends itself to adaptive capacity, your capacity to put things in place to address climate change. So those are just some of the things I wanted to state of what you need to think about when planning a VCA. Now, another user asks a question, what about the sharing of data? And how do we know where to find relevant data? I can only speak in relation to climate change information. I know the 5Cs has a lot of information at the regional level that they are more than willing to share. As a National Climate Change Office, what I could say is that we have a lot of information, but there are a few things that we lack that we're working on. Like, for instance, having our own website. We have documents that we would love to share, right? But the lack of a website for our office is something that, because I would love to point you to that website right now, but we don't have it. And lack of resources is one of the issues that lends itself to us not having a website. So we have a lot of information, and I like to, in terms of climate change information for Belize, we have a website. No, sorry, we have a Facebook page, National Climate Change, Belize National Climate Change Office Facebook page. Whatever you need, you can just send a message or make a comment or whatever it is on that Facebook page, and we will handle whatever issue you have. If it's information, we would gladly share it with you. And so I like to direct you to that Facebook page, and you could like it as many times as you want to. And so those are the questions.
Yes, let's look at a new question just came in. There's some questions on the comment and the chat, on the chat. So let's look at the chat to look at these comments, and hopefully we can answer all of the questions or comments that are here. So let's see. Can you scroll up there? Just scroll up. Yeah, go.
Okay, there's a question, are VCAs being used in Belize, and how effective are VCAs in other countries? I can speak for Belize. We had vulnerability and adaptation assessments being done. We had about 3 of those, but we're now going to do a vulnerability and capacity assessment, because the capacity part of it deals with people's ability to adapt to climate change. So there's a difference between the vulnerability and adaptation assessment and the vulnerability and capacity assessment. Both deal with impacts, people's vulnerability to those impacts, but the one that we're about to do now, and we're going to do one, I think this year or next year, and that will include people's capacity to adapt. And so they are being used in Belize to inform many of our actions in the different sectors, and also to put policies in place for climate change.
On a regional level, I know that St. Kitts is one of the countries that have been taking, I could say, a huge step forward in terms of when it comes to the impacts of climate change and incorporating. So now they have incorporated that within their processes in terms of developing projects and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I want to say, before I go, I want to say that I'm not sure about other countries, but I know for Belize, we are doing assessments. But I can say that one of the constraints, as in any area, is resources, financial resources. We would love to do an assessment covering all areas of the country, but because of lack of resources, there's certain times we can just do a district or 2, or the areas that we think are more vulnerable. or maybe we just target the sectors, and that's what we did in the last one. So, but as time goes on, and as we build our capacity and as we acquire more resources as an office, and we'll be able to do more of those assessments. And as I said before, I'm willing to share information on the last assessment that we implemented that was completed in 2015.
Okay, so now we have a participant from, a representative from the Red Cross. So now we invite the representative from Red Cross to speak.
Yeah, I know we have been doing VCAs for a couple of years now, but I think it was the same question that someone had asked earlier about the information. Where do these information go and how can they be accessed? I know here at the office we have several maps. We go into the communities and we map the area and it come back out, but where does this information have been stored?
The Climate Change Center has a database known as the Regional Clearinghouse. This database is free to access. We'll be taking further look into that later on within the webinar, but we willingly accept and we welcome whatever resources that these countries have. Within the past year, we have expanded our data node. So there are 5 countries within the Eastern Caribbean who have direct access to our data node, and they can enter their information within the database, and they set the permissions as to who they want to see. And if they make it public, then users on the front end can download these resources free of cost. So if you guys have information that you'd like to share, please feel free to email us. I'm sure we can work out an arrangement where we can house your information within our database.
Okay.
Okay, there's another question that says, does the TNA assist in carrying out VCAs? By TNA, I'm sure you mean the technology needs assessment. And the answer to that is no, not at this point, because the technology needs assessment project is aimed at collaborating with stakeholders to identify technologies which can be implemented within the country and the barriers that prevent that implementation, and the development of a technology action plan to address those barriers. And so based on the feedback that we have gotten from stakeholders, vulnerability and capacity assessment has not been suggested as a technology. And as such, I really don't think that it can be considered as a technology. Obviously, it's not really a technology. And so short is that it is not being considered. But what I would say right now is that the 4th National Communications Project that's being implemented is moving towards doing a VCA in the very near future. And we will be doing VCAs, I think, every 4 years. Every 4 years through the national communications process. And so we have 3 at the moment. By next year, we're supposed to have a 4th. And in the next couple of years, we will keep updating that with new and updated information. And so that is the answer to that particular question. Hand over to the moderator.
Okay, thank you, Colin, for answering those questions. Now we move on to the next set of presentations. We will now cover the various climate tools that the Climate Change Center offers to everyone, especially to Belizeans. And basically the purpose of these presentations is to inform everyone, of the tools available that they can use towards the vulnerability and capacity assessment development process, which means, whenever you're trying to do your vulnerability assessment, these are some of the tools that you can access to enhance your reporting. So with that, having been said, we invite Ms. Diana Ruiz to speak on Seacoral.
All right, thanks again, Anivar. I'll just give a brief overview of Seacoral, and this segment just basically looks at some of the tools that were developed by the center and its key partners, which can also aid in the decision-making process. So Seacoral, the Caribbean Climate Online Risk and Adaptation Tool, was developed for the region by the region, and it's available on the center's website. It takes its users through the climate risk management cycle. So you look at a context, adaptation options, you look at vulnerability, risks, evaluation and monitoring, and also look at awareness raising. So the tool would take you through, if you can see on the screen, it will take you through the risk management cycle, and it can be applied to 5 activity types. And these include project or programs, budget and planning, legislation, strategy or policy, and national planning. So what you would do is you'd apply an activity that you are developing or has been developed if you want to make an assessment to see what gaps exist in relation to climate change, and you'd apply that activity by using Seacoral, and it would bring out some of those questions. So Seacoral helps with the identification of risks and provides possible solutions to address those risks. So that's just a quick synopsis, just to let you know that the tool is available and it can be used, just as Colin mentioned before. If you're planning to build a bridge, for example, this is one of the tools that you'd want to use to make sure that you have taken climate change considerations into that activity. So with that, I would pass on the time to my colleague, Mr. Gil Harry, who will take you through the CARIWIG tools.
Good afternoon, everyone. So what I'm going to do here is to take you guys through a portal called the CARIWIG portal. Now, earlier, some of you guys asked question about where can we get data, and also how can you quantify the impacts of climate change to put in whatever research or work that you're doing. So this tool, this portal, the CARIWIG portal, which is located at cariwig.caribbeanclimate.bz, gives you access to data, right? The data here will not specifically quantify climate impacts, but it gives you data in a format that you can input into actual impact modeling tools and different software that you may use. So, so just a quick overview here. This tool is located at cariwig.caribbeanclimate.bz, and it's separated into 3 different sections. So we have historical data, we have future data, and we have simulations, right? So let's start quickly with with historical data, right? So under historical data, we have observed station data, we have reanalysis data, and we have just summaries of data according to predetermined domains. So let's do a quick look at the historical data. So the historical data here is separated into two 30-year periods. We have from 1971 to 2000 and from 1981 to 2010. And if you look on the screen, you will see these little circular icons. So this pretty much represents the distribution of the historical data or stations that we have in this system across the entire Caribbean region. Now, what is important here is that we do not provide you guys with the daily data. What is being provided is the summaries of this information. So if you would like the daily data itself, for example, you would need to go to your local Met Services or through the CIMH, which is they have the official mandate to manage the Met Services data for the entire region. But what you can get from here, for example, if you click on one of these, you can actually access data for each of these locations. And here, this is just a quick graph that can show you data for the Middlesex area in Belize that has been collected for the specific time period. So we have data for approximately 8 variables, but they all stem from either temperature, wind speed, rainfall, and sunshine. So those are the 3 main variables, and then from there we derive other variables from those. So if you want historical data, you can get historical data at this from this location here, right? And the next section is reanalysis data, right? So in the absence of raw historical data, the next best thing is reanalysis data. So pretty much this is it's pretty much an international accepted standard whereby data from all different sources is pulled together and modeled in a way such that it will interpolate and give a very good estimate of what the weather or the climate at that point would have been. So for example here, the data is being pulled from satellites, from ships, from buoys, even from the actual data collection stations throughout the region, and that is taken, interpolated, and put in a gridded format. So if, for example, if you're doing a research and you want data specifically, let's say for northern Belize, and you might not have data, you can come to this portal here and get what would be a very good estimate of what the climate would be would have been in that area, right? So and from there we have the summaries, which is the same as the historical data, but it's organized into a northwest and the southeast domain, and you can access just the bare summaries of that information from here, in case you're interested in regional data. So, and the second domain of this website would be future data. Previous presentations, they spoke to climate projections. So if you want climate projections, which is pretty much using climate modeling data to predict what the future climate will be like, you can get that information from here. So I'm loading this page. It's a lot of data. First of all, it will take a lot. It might take a little while to load, but essentially, you can get data from this site from 2 main models, which is the ECOM5 and the HADCM3, which is a model from the UK. So we have projections for there for 3 time slices, well, more than 3 actually, for multiple 30-year time slices stemming from models that run the data from the past all into the future up until the year 2100. And you can access this data at this page. This page, though, has approximately close to 30 climate variables. So you will likely find whatever variable you want, you will likely find it here. And one of the key things to note is that these are all, for people that are familiar with climate projections, these are all based on the ESRS scenarios. We have not incorporated the RCP scenarios into this portal as yet, but we're working to do so. You will get a very detailed introduction to projections and scenarios in the upcoming workshop. So if you have questions, you can definitely, they can be answered during the workshop. And under future data, we also have the change factors. So in essence, when you do research, especially in regard to climate change, there are 2 main things. You take data over a long period of time, at least 30 years, because we're dealing with climate and not necessarily variability. But most importantly, we deal mainly with the change factors. We deal with the change in the climate versus nominal climate variables or climate values. So, and to do that, we provide an easy section that will give you the change factors, which is pretty much the change from the historical past into the future. And that is why you'd see this graph here is not as intense. It's just showing the change from the past going into the future based on the selected model that is here. And again, with future data here, you cannot access the daily or monthly or even yearly climate projections from this portal. It is simply grouped into 30-year time spans, and then from there, we give monthly averages through those for that entire 30-year time span. So if you want daily data, you can get that from our clearinghouse portal, which Mr. Lopez will go through in the next presentation. So, and we have another area for simulations. So the simulations area is where we use the data and provide tools. So, and there are two main tools in this section. We have the weather generator and the tropical storm model. So the weather generator is built on the premise that to do climate, to do impact modeling or impact work with impacts, we need to quantify that impact. The issue with it is that impacts are typically felt more at the community level or in a localized area. And climate projections, at least based on availability and the current computing capacity, pretty much you cannot get climate projections to run at a specific location. For example, if you have a watershed, you know, one of the grid points from the climate models is 25 square kilometers, and you will know that 25 square kilometers is a very large area relative to our small country, right? And in other countries, they're even smaller than 25 square kilometers. So the challenge here is to downscale that data further using techniques that are not necessarily computationally expensive. And one way to do that is via statistical downscaling. So the weather generator gives you localized scenarios of data based on climate projections. And one of the key things with it is that it facilitates impact modeling, meaning that the outputs can go directly into impact models. And secondly, it gives you the ability to study rare events. So for example, you can pretty much, with climate change, you can estimate the likelihood of a rare event occurring. And that event would be based on whatever you're looking for. For example, if you'd like to know what's the likelihood of a rainfall event going over 100 inches in the future for a specific location, the weather generator gives you scientifically sound methodologies to do so. And then secondly, we have the tropical storm model. So what the tropical storm model does, it was developed mainly through the University of the West Indies. And this tropical storm model, it allows you to take a hurricane of historical significance, and you can run that hurricane through an area of interest. So for example, we can take here, let's do a quick run through. We'll just select an area and we'll draw a part. So what we're going to do here is we're going to run Hurricane Katrina over, well, not a specific country, don't worry, I'm not trying to damage any country here. We're just selecting one for the purposes of this presentation, right? And here, we have three categories, categories 1, category 3, and category 5. So for example, we can take Katrina with his properties, and let's say we put that at a category 5. And we can actually run that storm at selected speeds over an area. And by doing so, it will give you the wind speed and the rainfall data in regards to that storm. And of course, you can always take that data and put it into an impact model. And from there, you can actually quantify impacts based on the data that was given from this model. So that ends this presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gilhari. Now we invite Ms. Michelle Lopez to speak on a clearinghouse of the center.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. As I stated earlier, I'm the document management officer for the center, which basically means that the regional clearinghouse is my baby. This database was developed in 2010. The center saw the need for knowledge sharing as part of our, you could say, part of our operations or achieving our objectives. And so with help from various grants, this clearinghouse was developed. We first started off with just a couple documents within it. Now we house approximately 6,000 documents within our vault. These documents are what we've collected over the years, whether it's produced by the 5Cs on a regional level. What we've also done was also house information on different SIDS regions, such as the Pacific. We also have, so these can be used. The whole purpose of this clearinghouse is to help people in decision making. So we provide whatever research is freely available. We believe in open knowledge, and researchers can download these information free. Now there are 3 different levels of information, accessing information on this website. You can download a full document once produced by us, or if we have permission from the provider to do so. We also do direct you to the owner of the information. So you will see information about the resource, but upon clicking it, you'll then be directed to the website where the owners have published it. Or there's a feature known as send and request. Sometimes we have information that the owners decide that they want to be kept private, and the email will be sent to us. We contact the owners of the information and we facilitate that exchange. Since our introduction of social media in 2013, we are now averaging approximately 13,000 download document retrieval every month. So these documents are being pulled from our servers on a monthly basis. And we've been pulled from all over the world, from both developed and developing countries. And it's being used by researchers, students, etc. Like I had mentioned before, we willingly welcome information. We've been working across the region to gather information. A lot of the information in the region is not available, meaning that it's on print, so it's not digital. So what we have been working as well with Caribbean, with the region, is to get their print into digital. We have successfully done so with 5 Eastern Caribbean countries who now have the capacity to convert their print resources or historical information into digital and store it within the database. The reason for this is because we can't know where we're going unless we know where it came from. So these past historical information can also help in terms of decision making and future planning. Even with our VCAs, they can be of use as well. In terms of Belize, if any of your departments want to share the information, they can email us or contact us, and I'm sure we can have an arrangement made to get your information available. So just to take a look at what we have available. So there's a database that has the digital information. We also have document collections. It's basically past interns have came and they did research and they did a compilation of resources, so we just grouped them. We have climate modeling data. We have country profiles for each CARICOM member state. That country profile is very basic. It just states who is the UNFCCC focal point in each country and how to contact them. And of course, there's a projects database. This database contains various climate change projects that have been that were conducted across the region. Tells you who are the funders, the implementing agencies, and etc. So let's first take a look at the clearinghouse database. You can search by document type. So we have documents, we have books. So the center currently has a library of approximately 2,000 books. So the metadata or the information about the catalog about these books is available online. If you see it, you can contact us. Feel free to come into our offices and you have access to our library. We also have various CDs within the past workshops and so forth that were conducted within the region. Information was stored on CDs, so we have that as well. And website links. So we try to promote, like I said, open knowledge. So we do store website links for other organizations and resources that we have across the region. So just to do a quick example, we can search by text. So if I came and I'm looking, let's say for agriculture, I can type in agriculture if I want. I know, right now. Agriculture, and then I will click search, and it will generate a list. And if you see on the corner, it will be this is what we call metadata. It's just information about that resource before you even open it. You know what's inside. So everything we have on agriculture is here, and you organize it. Of course, the most recent information will show at the top. There's an option here where you can preview the document. Some of them you can preview. It's not all. So that's text search. You can search by country as well. So let's say I want to search for Belize, and it will generate that. And you can also search by various sectors and topics. So since we're talking about vulnerability assessment, I would like to search for VCAs. And if you notice, Belize is still there, so it's going to search now for documents that have been tagged VCAs and for the country of Belize. And when I click search, it will generate everything that has been tagged for that. So you'll see the risk atlases that have been done by the CaribSafe project. There are also some VCAs that were done under the EU GCCA project. So if you see there's a VCA for Lemanal, Arenal, Cookie Tree, Rancho, Isabella Bank, etc. So we have 31 VCAs within the database currently that have been tagged for Belize. All right. As you can see, you can hover. We do have one here from Red Cross. The one from Arenal is from Red Cross. These, like I said, these documents were either sent to us or we went out and we active, because what we normally do is called document scraping, where we actually go out and hunt for the information. So my email address, I can probably put it, let me see. Yeah, I was trying to just find Notepad or something to like circulate it afterwards. Yeah, so please feel free to email me. I'm sure we can have a discussion. I'm looking forward to having a discussion with the NCCU after this as well, to see how we can get the resources that we currently have in Belize within the database. I must also say that of our collection, most of our documents that we have within the database is from Belize. So we do have a strong collection from Belize as well. So there are any questions? No.
Okay, let's look if we have any questions. Let's see if any comments were provided for the 3 presentations. So it appears that there's no question or no comments for these 3 presentations being given. Well, I believe that this is the end of our webinar, and I want to thank all the presenters for taking time out and delivering these excellent presentations. And also I want to thank the participants, you all that have attended this webinar. Thank you so much for giving your time as well. And now we are looking forward to seeing you, the participants, and also presenters, if you have time, to join us next week from May 8th to the 10th, which is Tuesday to Thursday, to join us for the workshop that will be carried out at the Judge Price Center here in Belmopan. With that, I wish everyone the best and see you guys on Tuesday.